Hello and welcome back. So before we get started, quick note, I'm actually re-recording this intro from the future, so if this suddenly cuts into my spoiler-free thoughts or anything else and the office and myself and my clothes look completely different, well, that's why I've been having a lot of weird issues with my mic and just new setup. So rather than subject you guys to the robot sounds of a newly compressed video, I decided just to reshoot it and then go on to what I had previously. But today we are going to be covering The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie. And the First Law trilogy, I have read it before, and it is firmly within my top 5 all-time best series ever. Joe Abercrombie is a master at grimdark, and as a huge fan of that genre, I think he does it the best. His writing is masterful, just the way that he handles characterization. Everybody is so unique and distinct, and it's so dark, but with the wit and humor that he's able to interject into this, it just winds up being a really fun, interesting read. And if you're a fan of fantasy in general, even if you're not really a grimdark person, I'd still say check it out. And one of the reasons why I'm redoing this now is because I've heard consistently that The Age of Madness is even better, and I have not read it yet. So I wanted to re-go through these first few books, get the reviews under my belt so everything's fresh, and then dive into something that I didn't think was possible, which is something better than the First Law trilogy. But for this video, I'm going to start off with my spoiler-free thoughts, talk about some of the things I really enjoy about this series and this book in particular. I'm not going to dive into every different character, but I will have some spoiler sections where I dive into my 3 most favorite characters of this book, specifically with them, but this is a series that is very close to my heart, so I will be doing a lot of content around this series, and we'll be doing some character dives eventually once I start getting up some steam with this series and have the basic books covered. But without further ado, environment change. So, getting into my spoiler-free thoughts on the series, I will recommend this series to anybody who is a modern fantasy fan. It is very firmly grimdark, but if you don't even like grimdark, but you are a modern fantasy fan in any capacity, I highly recommend picking it up, and for a few different reasons. Firstly, Joe Abercrombie can write. He may be the best writer that I know of to date for how he writes characters. His character voices are so unique, has such a biting sense of humor, and despite being in such a hopeless, really dark world, the humor and everything really shines through. Well, even though this is not a happy story, it's grimdark, you're carried through by this biting wit and just great humor interlaced through the whole thing. Secondly, there is a lot of cool subversions that happen in this book. It is a grimdark story, but it starts out like a normal type of epic fantasy or heroic fantasy going there. And everything that you're built up to expect, or that you've been trained to expect by being a fantasy fan in general, he'll take that and then just like blast you in the head with something that you just did not expect at all.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
And thirdly, the world that he builds is very epic, very cool. The world building that went into this is even pretty unique. You can see the normal modern fantasy influences in his works, but there's no clear derivation from someone else. Maybe there's some heavy Tolkien influence, but only just so you can expect something that Tolkien would write, just so he would go in and then just completely subvert that. But for the world building, it's so crystal clear and just memorable. That's one of the biggest things, because I haven't read the First Law trilogy in years, but I remember exactly what's going to happen. I remember the plot beats, I remember the characters. Reading this book again was like stepping into a well-worn pair of shoes. I started to anticipate specific scenes, specific plot points, just because they were so memorable on that first read-through. And the First Law, in this book in particular, is just very well done and just really stuck out. And whenever I decide to do a top 5 fantasy series of all time, then this series will firmly be up there. One of my favorite series that I am constantly recommending to people. Now, getting into a little bit of negatives for this book. This first book in particular, there's not a lot of action that happens in this book or even plot. The way that I've heard it described that I really agree with is more you're just being introduced to each different character, and they get their intro, they all get together, and then when the book is over, you get a little hint of the action, you get a little bit of that, and you start to peek through that world that he's made. But really you're just spending the whole book getting to know each of the characters and kind of getting to the part where you would do step 1 of the quests. That is a negative compared to the rest of the series. There is still action in this book and there is a lot of cool things that are happening with it, but I think his decision to do that step back and really let you get to know the characters was a very good one, because crazy shit's going to happen. Spoiler, books 2 and 3 are amazing and there will be jam-packed and you will not have that issue with any of the rest of the books. But when you start to get to the end of this book and you start having some of that action pick off and see what like it could have been, you will understand that like, oh, this could be way more. I don't really view it as a negative. I love the characterization that Joe Abercrombie does, so just taking that extra time to really let you get to know the characters and then kind of letting you peek at what's to come, I thought was still a very compelling decision, but Book 1 by far is the weakest in the trilogy, and now it is a very, very strong book. It's just that books 2 and 3 are so much better, and when you start to get into the Age of Madness, which I haven't read, but I have heard that they then take that and then just everything that was good and dark and bleak. In these books, they just ramp it up to 11.
Where can you go from there? Where?
I don't know.
Nowhere, exactly. What we do is if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly.
Now I could very well do like a 30-minute video just diving into these books like I do for Malazan, but I'm going to limit it for this one because I want you to experience the book first off on your own. But I will talk about the spoilers for 3 of some of my favorite characters, and it talks about like why I think the series is very well done. But getting into some spoilers, my favorite character I think in the series would have to be a toss-up between Logan Ninefingers and Glotka. But starting with like Logan Ninefingers, Joe Abercrombie does this very interesting thing where he will set up certain characters that they seem pretty normal on the surface. And generally it's they either are horrifically hideous and just disgusting people to start with, and then you realize that they're actually some of the best characters in there, or they start with the traditional like hero or just general like trope that you would be associate with like a certain like barbarian archetype in this case, and then they twist it into something dark, and it leaves you in a spot where as you're going through some of these characters, you're like, hey, this guy's like a hero, he seems like pretty well done. It's like, yeah, I really relate to this character. He's just making really smart decisions and he's just getting a bad hand. I don't see why. Oh, he likes to do that? Oh no. And Logan Ninefingers is one of the more interesting examples of this. You start out with him in the series and like he's just trying to survive. Like he seems a very wise guy that has lived a hard life. Like he's getting thrown into fights he doesn't want to get thrown into, and he has all these great one-liners and quips about like, you know, the best battle is the one that you avoid and like tactics, and he seems like a very well-rounded character. But you go on and you keep hearing legends of someone called the Bloody Nine. Now Logan Ninefingers, Bloody Nine, safe to assume that they are connected, and as he's like off on his own trying to explore and meeting bayaz, like, you know, you keep hearing like about the Bloody Nine, and you'll get into certain action spots where Logan by no means is like not a incapable fighter, but you know, he will do things that seem normal and that like seems like kind of above the board, and you're like, first half of the series you're like, why is he such a big deal? Like he's a very cool character, very wise, but he's not doing anything like exceptionally crazy that would make him like stand out and be this kind of horrific legend that you're hearing. And then at the end of the book you meet the Bloody Nine, and it's like a multiple personality disorder where inside of Logan Ninefingers there is something very dark, very brutal. It's kind of like the whole berserker thing in the Norse mythology, but when the Bloody Nine comes out, it is completely terrifying, and you just spent 3/4 of a book or half of a book kind of meeting Logan. It's like, oh wow, what a nice, well-adjusted guy. I don't know what the big deal is. I guess he's just a really good duelist, and then Bloody Nine comes out.
I'm going to kill you. I'm going to find where you live, and I'm going to murder you!
And you're just kind of like speechless, going, oh, is this going to happen to the rest of the characters? And I think he's just a very interesting character. Throughout the series goes, he's very highly up there as one of the most interesting and some of my favorite characters, but just that idea of like that berserker rage, that the berserker has a completely coherent personality and Logan's constantly in a battle to kind of be in control. Like imagine someone like hulking out, but like the Hulk actually is smart and a sadist. And you get kind of an example of this character, and he's not inhuman even in that form, but he just doesn't care, and the only thing he wants to do is drink his enemy's bone marrow and just like dance in their organs. It's very terrifying, and just the first time you're experienced to that, you know, you're captivated. Just how is this even happening? The second character I wanted to get into was Glotka. He's kind of a reverse mirror of this in a few of the characters. He was a, you know, champion swordsman, a noble. He had everything handed to him, athletically gifted, very good looking, and in a giant war where his kingdom was fighting the Empire of the Desert, he winds up getting captured and just crippled and tortured. And the torturers of this empire are just super sadistic, and they're very methodical, and basically has left this once cream of the crop noble that was just full of all the aristocratic ideals, and left him a shambling cripple that will shit the bed, and every time he has to face a flight of stairs, he just feels horror at the pain he's about to experience. He became a inquisitor, which means that after receiving that amount of torture, he figured, hey, I already have a very unique insight into the realm of torture, so I'm gonna go torture more people and share this love with everyone else. As the story builds and, you know, he starts to get resolute, he seems to be the character that knows like pretty much the most that's happening. That's still a main POV. And you watch him being able to change, show compassion. He's kind of like the smartest character in the room, or at least the most observant character in the room. But as we start to go on later on with the plot, and, you know, he starts dealing with West and Artie and all those people, you see him actually show like human compassion and kindness. And that even despite his twisted inquisitor-like nature, you know, he's probably one of the better people in there, or at least the ones with the most common sense, because he has been forced to like face off the cruel realities of this world. I just really liked him as a counter mirror to a lot of the other characters. So I will go into detail, but you have kind of basically what he was when he was younger in Giselle, and you get to see the problems that happens with nobility. The elitism, the snobbery, just the general lack of wanting to do anything hard, and disdain that they have for the peasantry and the merchants. And you have a character like that then goes through something horrific enough to change everything about them, from their personality to their viewpoint. And so he has this like weird insight into the society, and he's just a very, very cool, interesting character. Now, thirdly, he's not a main POV, but I really like what they did with him, and that would be Bayaz. Bayaz, first of the Magi, is kind of like the Gandalf character in here. He starts out in the beginning as the normal type of arch-wizard or general like wizard that you'd see in some of these classical stories. Like, he knows a lot, he has the hidden secrets of the world, very smart, if not a bit arrogant, and just seems to be like knowing all the hidden levers and the secrets that has been happening in this place. But what Abercrombie did was that he starts out being that wizard that's always in control, always knows what's happening, always has the upper hand, and then you throw him in really unpredictable situations because all the characters are clinically insane in here, and it would be impossible to keep track of everything. So you see that arrogance turn into a serious character flaw, and you start seeing him lose his temper, and when he finally does do magic in there, it's terrifying. It's none of that like, I'm gonna throw a fireball. It's like, I'm going to stare at you and you're going to explode into a million little pieces, and there's nothing you can really do about it.
Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
You have like this theme line that's going throughout the series. They talk about how you don't want to break these laws of magic, and that's like eating people, and you don't want to go to the other side. And there seems to be something where you just want to limit the amount of magic you're using as possible, because when you use it, you're reaching out to basically hell, and that's going to like negatively affect you. And Bayaz uses magic repeatedly in the series, and you watch him lose his temper more and more, lose more control, and getting more like short with people. And then there's just a lot of little things that you think that, hey, something's not right here. He's trying to portray a certain image, but you're seeing that like image constantly crack, and the more observant characters actually notice that. And I won't spoil anything, but that's a plot thread that we're going to tug and tug and tug as we go through the series, and one of the coolest like subversions that you're going to see. Now, I won't go into what details of actual subverting it happens, but there's enough in this book where you get glimpses past that mask to know that it's going to happen. Now, I have mentioned in my TBR video that should come out before this one that I will be picking up the series, and this is going to be one of the series that I will absolutely be finishing this year. The First Law, just these next 3 books, are firmly in my top 5, and I'm super excited to be diving back into this series. And if you took nothing else from this video, get the book. Just whatever you do, buy the book, rent it, go to the library. It does not matter. This is one of the greatest things that I have ever read. And if you're any type of fan of fantasy, then you should be reading this. The grimdark, the humor, the writing, the characterization, I just have not seen it done better in this genre. And even getting into books 4 and 5 of like Malazan, this to me, I would hold up to it so far. We'll see how Malazan finishes, but one of the favorites of all time. You guys can expect me as I start to read more of this series and get my notes back into order. I will be doing some off-book videos for this, diving into some characters, talking about certain themes. This will be a series that I will be milking incessantly because it's one of my favorites. It's kind of like Daniel Green's Wheel of Time series. This is a book series that I have resonated more than any other, and rereading this first book and knowing that it's the weakest in the series really resonated that with me. But that'll be in the future. I want to get through at least the first law before I start doing that, and generally my MO, though I have not done it yet, says this will be released, is I want to get through the series, have the reviews, have the notes, before I start diving off into, the kind of side lore tangent. Probably make some shit posts, do a couple sketches of it, because that's just fun to do, and there's a wide breadth of material that I have to work with here, but hopefully I can get some more stuff out for this, but expect me to review the books first. But as always, thank you guys for stopping by. This is one of my favorite series, so I especially appreciate you guys stopping by to check this one in particular out, and as always, take it easy.